Hello everyone, welcome back to another video, and today we'll be looking over the objectivity definitions. So I know a lot of people that wonder what definition to use for objectivity, and then on the other side they wonder what refutations to have against the definitions. And I understand I highlighted this in past videos, but I figure I'll go a little bit deeper into it. So the best definition to use for objectivity, in my opinion, would be the API scientific method, which to find this, we just look up what we did yesterday, which is objective journalism method. In my opinion, this is like the best definition for objectivity that I found, and it really narrows down the perception of what constitutes objectivity. And we'll go ahead and get through the American Press Institute since that's the original um, articulation. So rather than saying objectivity does not have biases or objectivity means facts, we have a deeper understanding with a more like realist approach, especially held within journalism. And then especially if you are the affirmative, then you limit the debate in a sense of showing that journalists can still incorporate biases, although they have to have like supporting evidence. So for instance, as the American Press Institute says, they talk about how objectivity calls for journalists to develop a consistent method of testing information or a transparent approach to evidence. So this basically essentially ties into the affirmative where they limit the debate in sense of showing that journalists can still incorporate biases, although they'd have to have more supporting evidence, and just makes it where that debate is more focused on rather than the biases in the information debate or whether it's like an actual good conclusive evidence like in terms of that. And this also ties into the resolution class because you can show how due to the term prioritize in the resolution, then the API's definition further expands on what it means to have advocacy and objectivity coexist in the press, or prioritization of them, instead of like vice versa, where advocacies prioritize objectivity, the API would be objectivity prioritize over advocacy. This is because like the API definition understands that journals cannot be fully objective, and instead it settles for like a grade world. And the main thing in this topic really comes down to and is understanding like the resolution clash, because all the rounds that I have debated so far, besides like one, have been slightly confusing because not everyone knows where advocacy and objectivity are conflicting, especially under the term prioritize and the definitions that some like choose to run. Just like learn how the terms conflict and how any prioritization would lead to exacerbations, because not a lot of people debate over prioritization rather than they debate over like the pure advocacy or pure objectivity is what they choose to debate instead of like a prioritization and how that harms. And then there are a lot of answers to the API method, but for the sake of time, we'll just highlight over 4 of them. So the first and most common one would be over the method of information, or how the data, or like how the data and truthfulness is collected. So obviously you can see that they define it as a method of testing information. So although this doesn't really require a unique argument, it still helps your opponent, like it still helps test your opponent's knowledge while also making you sound more pronounced to the judge. So essentially when someone asks this or you ask this, they're asking for a determination of factual information. And this can trip up some people very easily but it's not really that hard to answer. You're just asking what this method of testing information is, which not a lot of people dive that deep into it. Now, if we want to find what a fact-checking system or approach is, we could use either like scientific journalism or fact-checking system. So we'll just go ahead and look up like fact-checking science journalism. And like most of these handouts, however, just highlight an outline to journalist reports in objective press, and this can also be used against like refutations about how objectivity can report on fake news, essentially by saying like the method of information retention is like very thorough or whatnot. And I don't know if this is the right one. This is by MIT. Yeah. Let's see. Okay, so right here it gives you like a direct step like highlight of how they check like fact-based information, or how the checker finds it. So essentially you cross-apply scientific journalism with an objective journalism when people ask you for this in order to like determine whether something is actually factual and whatnot. And honestly, this is time more to like newspaper and hybrid models. along with like the original steps that we have, like the review of a fact checker. And then now, of course, sometimes we can't determine 100% factual evidence, in which you can like do two things, in my opinion. The first is that as the affirmative, you can conclude that an objective press uses a weight of evidence alternative, in which the press usually compares like data of two things and only includes the more like supported one, or they could just do like an inclusiveness alternative. And in the inclusiveness alternative basically makes it where like it's like a scientific article. The journalist also draws their conclusion at the end. So for instance, if there are like four people in the room and there are obviously four people in the room, but someone else says there are five people in the room, then the inclusiveness perception would note both observations, but have a conclusion about the more supported claim, or the one that is actually factual. And of course, it's like a silly example, but you get the point. And if you like cross apply this to like a bigger example, like you could bring up climate change. So it'd be the people that say that climate change isn't real, and the people that say that climate change is real. And they would like show both statistics and both evidence points for either side, but at the conclusion of the article, they'd say which side is more like largely support. And of course, this isn't like really relative to progressive movements. For instance, I mean, it could be like a tiny bit applicable, but it's not like hugely like life turning. And then additionally, we could also find that your opponent would also look at the root words of objectivity. Find out what those are really quick. Root words of objectivity, and talk about how the root terms address the definition debate. And as you can see, let's see, it's a little weird in here. Okay, so we can obviously see that due to like the origins of the root words, that objectivity is addressing like an object, whether an object is being true or whatnot. So let's see. Trying to find something. No, actually, we'll try this one. Okay. Yeah, so they're essentially trying to show that it's impersonal or unbiased is what they're trying to limit the debate to. So there are like several ways to address this, and most of that we already talked about. So just as a recap, you can talk about how like the root terms are talking about perfect objectivity rather than a prioritization of it. And you can also talk about how there's like no conflict between your terms and your opponents, as yours just furthers the perception of their terms. Like objectivity, if they say it's impersonal or unbiased, you could just say like your definition just furthers it by showing how they're unbiased or impersonal or whatnot. Or you could just not defend that whatsoever and say that if we have an unbiased or impersonal debate, and then if we define advocacy, so let's look up what advocacy is defined as. I already have my pre-definitions, but this is just the default one. So advocacy would be biases or public support for recommendation of a particular cause or policy. So objectivity would be direct contradiction in this. Basically, it would be the inverse of advocacy. So essentially, although that would create conflict in the resolutional terms, it would still make it where the prioritization is a little bit like foggy or skewed. So we should use like the objective definition that the API uses, because then it's more of like towards the fact-based information rather than biases. I wouldn't recommend debating this style, but it would make sense more as the affirmative. But as a negative, you could say like we need resolution class, so it's biased versus non-biased. And then you could also talk about how there's no conflict between your terms and your opponents, as yours just for the perception what their terms say. And then finally, you could also talk about how our prioritization definition is more applicable to the resolution, since it's especially in sync with the resolution. And personally, and I know not a lot of people like definition debaters, but I think this topic is largely off the terms in the resolution, and you just need to be able to like refute your opponents and like yet alone defend yours. And then next we have the resolution clash argument, in which your opponent brings up the definition of advocacy and talks about how there is no clash between the sides with the API's definition, in which they use the advocacy definition. And due to our definition being the API's definition, they said that it's not being in direct contradiction to their definition, and thus there's no clash. Now, this would largely depend on their stance and definition of advocacy, but for the most part, you can actually turn this on them because they're essentially trying to say that objectivity is emotionless and heartless and whatnot, and is basically making the debate based on humans versus robots, essentially. So for most of these refutations, you can bring out how the definition prioritized to refute them, but additionally, you could also talk about the resolutional clash is between bias and non-bias rather than information and emotion, because we can obviously see that we're going to have information on both sides, but you can choose the route whatever you think is more applicable to addressing the resolutional clash. And then we also have the criticizations of API, which I believe I looked them up earlier in our last video, which would be the current article. How it holds like a lot of contradictions in the API model. Additionally, you can also see that the API model itself, if you look at it later on, I'm pretty sure it brings up some contradictions, but I know the current model better. So this is very simple, in which your opponent or you talks about the API definitions and how they themselves are bad. So if we look directly at this article, we can probably find contradictions pretty easily about advocacy. So like right here, if you look at this, regardless of how you may feel about the pursuit of objectivity in the original intent, has been used decades as a method for silencing voices of women and people of color, essentially saying that it stimulates marginalization. So that would be one standard in which you could point out how objectivity is bad. And then additionally, I believe there might be something else in this article about being contradictory to to the people in the press by limiting the freedom of speech. Let's see. I'm trying to find it and see if it's here. I don't remember exactly what it said. Well, I don't see it, but essentially it's saying that like if someone does not agree with a certain, like if they don't agree with the objective information, they essentially won't be hired, basically. But of course, like that we can see that that's a limitation on the people's freedom of speech, not only the press's. And you could just talk about how that violates democratic ideals. So to block this, you could either talk about their evaluation is an imperfect evaluation of objectivity or a perfect evaluation of objectivity. So either you could say how this definition specifically is talking about either an imperfect evaluation of objectivity or it's a prioritization of advocacy rather than objectivity. Or you could talk about how it's talking about perfect objectivity and how we aren't advocating for perfect objectivity in today's debate rather than prioritization. Either way, you talk about how the term prioritize combats this. And then additionally, you can also bring up the moral aspect of LD or the usage of ought in the resolution, in which you could talk about how we're debating on whether we should do something, not whether we can do something. So in conclusion, we'll go ahead and draw the video to an end. But just remember to account for whatever the author's original intent of the article was for when you're finding evidence and definitions, and just learn as much as you can about it. And also be mindful that as the affirmative or negative that you aren't necessarily debating about objectivity or advocacy being good or bad, but rather you're just showing how one of the two is lesser of the two evils. So don't be under the false impression that your side is a perfect utopia in the debate, and rather just like accept the realist approach instead, and accept that your side might not be perfect and how objectivity probably has problems and how advocacy probably has problems, but just prove how it's like the lesser of the two evils. And that draws us to the end of our video. Please like, share, and subscribe, and thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.